The White Sox are perceived to be less talented than a historically awful 2024 team, but projected to win more games in 2025, and my guess will make it help all make sense on today's episode of Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan and the site expert of SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the FanSided Network, and also have covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already, and also follow or subscribe to the show at wherever you get your podcasts. Well, the White Sox are projected to win 20 more games in 2025 by sources such as Zips and Pacoda. Yet the view is the Sox are somehow less talented than the historically awful 2024 team. And one guy who actually helped explain how 2024 was such an anomaly of bad is back on the show to help explain, make the projections make sense. And that is Jordan Lazowski of SoxOn35th.com, who I also want to get his viewpoints on Will Venable and how the Sox offseason went. And Jordan, first, you had a great thread on X Twitter breaking down how it actually does make sense for the Sox to be less talented and yet still win 60 games, which is actually a huge improvement. So can you kind of share with the Locked On White Sox audience how this makes sense?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me on, Todd. I appreciate it. I'm trying to figure out a way to do this without overdoing the nerd stuff. The long and short of it is projections are, yes, based on last season, but also understanding every projection you see is at a 50th percentile. So when you're running a projection, let's say you're on 100 projections, 50% of projections say you're going to be worse than what we end up at, and the other half says you're going to end up better than what the numbers say. So when you're seeing projections, it's sort of that 50th percentile outcome. That doesn't mean the White Sox are going to win 60 games or whatever it is. It's just more so, hey, in the simulations that were run, about half the time projections were better than this number, half the time projections were worse than this number. And that's how you settle at that. Now, the big question is, well, how do you find 20 extra wins on this roster? And a lot of it, and that's the hard part for fans to understand, and I've said this for a while, I don't think fans truly understand how historic last season was. Like a 21-game losing streak. There was an article I'd written at the time and kind of just broke down, they had a sometimes 70, 80% probability of winning these games across the streak and would lose. And it'd be crazy. It's like every single one of these things just tacked together didn't make sense. It was kind of the same thing for the whole season where, I mean, we can get into specific players and stuff like that as well, but there's so many historic things that had to go historically wrong that stacked up to 41 wins. If you're looking at percentile outcome for the White Sox, that was probably a first, second, fifth percentile outcome. That's the worst season in baseball history. There's no projection that says you're going to do that. So like I said, the long and short of it is not just the team getting better, but assuming that from a projection basis only, it's hard to do as bad as so many players did last year.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to get you back on, because you broke it down so well. And also I remember you breaking it down like they just never ran into like a starting pitcher having a bad day, or it was just so rare that they ran into those variants that should equal up to the old factory settings of you're guaranteed to win 60, you're guaranteed to lose 60. It's what you do with the other 42 that counts. But is there a good chance that this team is still not variance proof like in 2024? Because that was one of the case. They just clearly weren't variance proof and somehow flirts with losing 120 games again.
Yeah, they'll lose 100 to 110 games again. Like this is not something where, the projections are going to see this team lose less than 100 games. I don't think that's accurate. Not that the projections aren't accurate, but more so the reality of how those play out. That being said, just if you go through last season, like Luis Robert, Pacoda does their projections and they do 50th percentile, which is what everyone sees. So when you see projections somewhere, that's your 50th percentile projection. Luis Robert, Andrew Benintendi were somewhere between 1st and 10th percentile in their projections. A lot of other players were the same way. Andrew Vaughn, Gavin Sheets, none of these guys not only like didn't exceed their projections, but they fell drastically below them for whatever reason, to the point where it's like, it's almost so bad. Could it possibly be that bad again? Like Luis Robert's a great example. You have 4 or 5 years of data that say he's a above average ball player, pretty good ball player, and he's been great at times, elite at times. There's nothing that say, okay, based on all of that, this 1 year was expected to be as horrible as it was. Now, that's not saying it couldn't happen again, but it's saying that now you have that year of data along with all of the other years, and it shifts his projections down. But just because you do poorly in a season doesn't project you to do poorly in the next season. If it's one sentence, one phrase, it's regression to the mean. Eventually, things that are extremes, such as being the worst team in modern baseball, eventually move back towards the average outcome.
Yeah, and again, that's why I wanted to get you back on because, part of me still has this in my gut that I don't know if they're going to be variance proof. But at the same point, and for those that are tuning in and are like, oh, they're talking math. Baseball's math. Okay, I'm sorry.
Right.
It's math. Okay, it just depends on how much deep do you want to get in the math. Do you want to get in the basic 2+2, aka your averages, your slash line, or do you really want to get into the nitty gritty, the calculus? Because that's also where the game is, and that's where the game has always been. The TW, folks. Sorry, it's always been. Why do you think they put numbers on baseball cards? But
I think it's important too that, because so many people are saying, like, I don't understand why the projections say 55 to 60 wins. Like, people are like, I don't understand that. It's like, well, you can do one of two things. You can just dismiss the numbers nerds as doing something wrong or ruining the game. Or it's like, no, well, here's how it comes together. You might not agree. To your point, they might not be variance proof. Like, that's fine to have that opinion. And I don't think it's an unfair one to have. But at the same time, it's like, well, for those who are asking and for those who are curious, this is how it comes about. The long and short of it. Yes, it's math. Yes, for some, it's not fun. For others, like me, it's fun. But at the same time, I feel like, as you said, it's important to at least understand where this is coming from. Whether or not you like it or agree with it is another thing.
Well, it's also important because these are how rosters are constructed these days.
Mm-hmm.
You put in the projections, that's the formulas, and they run that stuff. I mean, it's Moneyball 101. And the
Right.
thing is, and that's where I want to get your take on this one is it seems like the White Sox have gone back to just the basic fundamentals of Moneyball, and that is get guys that get on base. But how the heck are they going to score runs? And I know I'm going to get your offseason takes in a little bit, but how are they going to score runs, especially if Luis Robert Jr. is traded before opening day? Because that's the only thing where I'm having a little bit of hard time seeing is you're going to get some guys on base, hopefully, but who's getting them home?
Yeah, the theory being you stack enough of them together that they eventually have to score runs at some point or another. It does frustrate me if you look at this lineup up and down that there isn't, to your point, kind of that power bat. Andrew Vaughn really probably doesn't qualify, and Luis Robert might be out of here by tomorrow, or he might be out of here by June, July. So you don't really have a true slugger on the roster, and I think that's something of a shortcoming for them. That being said, I do like the idea of a Mike Tauchman, guys who have preached, or not preached, but have been preached and have executed on base skills. It improves at bats, it increases a pitcher's likelihood of making a mistake, and at the end of the day, you're causing guys to throw more pitches, you're causing guys to have to work a little bit harder to where mistakes are more likely to happen. I think in general, the Moneyball on base percentage strategy is just work good at bats, good things will happen, versus having to be so reliant on hits. You talk about, high variance teams or not being able to avoid variance. One thing that, I think it was Carlos Correa said something very similar to this. It's like when you're not hitting, your on base skills really don't go away. You didn't lose the ability to get on base. You might have lost the ability for time to time to get hits to get on base, but your batting average a little bit more of a variance than your on base percentages, for example. And I think that's where you start to remove some of that variance of, you're reliant on hits to get guys on base and to eventually score runs versus now you're getting them on base in multiple ways and you can hopefully, obviously, use your hit. You don't have to stack up 3 or 4 hits. You might have to get a hit here or two to drive in guys who found other ways on base.
Yeah, and that's where I know where Moneyball kind of got away from into the run prevention, and also then you're focusing on the OPS of not only getting hits, but can you get doubles and triples? Where I like the fundamentals because I have covered way too many teams in the past that relied on the long ball. Which don't get me wrong, the White Sox should rely on the long ball. Guaranteed rate plays well to home runs, but there's a lot of times, as we've said, with variance where you just go through stretches where you're not going to crush the ball, where it's going to land in the glove. So that's where if you get back to these basics of just get guys on base, get guys that can have good at bats, professional at bats, I do think the White Sox could be variance, not will be anti-variance. I think they can get back to the mean. So you really helped me out here on this one. You're also a successful pitching coach at Montini Catholic. You've also coached some showcase teams. So I want to get Jordan's perspective on Will Venable and all these front office shakeups, and I want to get to that after the break. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to keep you feeling fuller longer. And my wife and I, we're actually looking to start eating heart healthy. We've added munching on pistachios to the diet. And I got to recommend to her getting some Wonderful Pistachios, especially because the no shells Wonderful Pistachios has that grab and go ease. And that's what she's always looking for when it comes to eating pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is a complete protein providing all 9 essential amino acids. Whether you're running between meetings or dropping off the kids, Wonderful Pistachios are the snack that works as hard as you do. Getting snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox, wherever you get your podcast to. We're available on Apple or Spotify. Also, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. And like I said, either way, if I'm on YouTube, we're on Spotify, we're on Apple. Either way, just get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me. And another person that you should be following, whether it's on X or Twitter or reading his stuff, is Jordan Lazowski, who's my guest. And Jordan, again, where can we find all your great content?
Most, if not all of it, is going to be soxon35th.com. Some of it will be, if you happen to like a certain tweet of mine, which some people do, some don't, at JLazowski14 is where you can find the rest of it. Some of my half-baked random thoughts that don't make it to an article, but...
And you guys have been doing the Sox on 35th podcast every now and again, too. So that's on YouTube, correct?
Yes. So we've been back doing the podcast. Some of them are on YouTube. Most of it is just Apple, Spotify, wherever you're getting your podcasts. That's been fun to start to bring back again. Kind of gives a venting outlet at the same time, too.
Oh yeah, that's how I survived the 2024 season, is doing this podcast. I mean, I had a day every day to just vent because, again, I still have this crazy attachment to this team from growing up with them and my emotional attachment. So it's like, if you can get an outlet to let out your frustration, I would suggest any fan do that. All right, so do you think Will Venable is going to add any wins?
It's a good question. I think of it, I have an odd opinion on Major League managers. My opinion tends to be they're not going to win you as many games as people think they will. They're just, the good ones won't lose you the games. And Pedro Grifol, of his many faults, felt like he was losing games at times over the past couple of years for the White Sox. I think that's an area where it's simply addition by subtraction, moving to Venable. But I also have a little bit more confidence in how he manages a team, how he manages and makes these decisions on the margins. I think that's where, managers maybe going to add by themselves 2 or 3 wins, maybe. But at the same time, it's how many they're losing you at the same time, if that makes sense. And I like what Will Venable has said. I like the way that Chris Getz and his staff have started to reshape things, basically admitting this is not working. And instead of trying to do it again and me being a different face, we have to change some things up. We have to do things differently. We have to find different people. And I think overall they have shown a commitment to that by who they've put in the dugout and in the front office. Now, does it translate to wins this season? Probably not as much, but if you're talking strictly about Will Venable and what he can provide, I think a lot of it is just my hope is a better presence on on the margins, essentially, where, hey, you're not losing the games. You might not win at the end of the day, but you can't blame your manager for these losses.
I'm really surprised front offices have not developed a wins above replacement metric for managers because it would help you. I mean, not like these managers are making gobs and gobs of money like NBA coaches, but it would at least help you understand, like, should I even be, like the next contract extension, should I pay them? Should I be firing them? Because I fully agree with you. You either want a net neutral manager or a guy, yeah, like Craig Counsell who adds, or Pat Murphy who adds like 3 or 4 wins, that type of stuff with the decisions, or that they can consistently press the right button and you're going to get a better result. So I'm fully in agreement with you. And that's why I wanted to, I phrased it in that way. Do you think he'll add any wins on that one? But were you shocked he chose the White Sox?
Yes. Depends on how many other offers he had. If he was dead set on becoming a manager this year, I don't know how many openings were that much
There were 2
more appealing.
Yeah, it was him and it was the him and the
Yeah.
it was the Sox and the Marlins because the Reds had hired Francona,
Francona.
and the Rockies decided to bring back Bud Black. That was the
Right.
shocker.
And I don't think any of those, like the Marlins, I don't think are more appealing. I don't think even if they hadn't made the decision in Cincinnati to go with Francona right away, I don't think Cincinnati's more appealing either. I think that's a team that typically gets stuck in the mud, and I'm almost surprised Francona went there, given his propensity to really look for wins and look to be a guy that's consistently in the playoffs. So I was surprised by that. But that being said, if he was determined to be a manager this cycle, it makes sense. But Chris Getz also had to sell him on the vision. Managerial openings would open next year, too. He could have waited one more year. You're not going to lose status as a bench coach. You risk new names obviously popping up, but at the same time, if you have a good reputation, you have a good reputation. And I'm partially surprised, but also not that surprised, because if he was committed to it, this was the best opening, in my opinion, just simply because you have someone at the top who's willing to say, what we did isn't working, we're trying different things, let's figure it out together.
Being a guy who's worked with players, helping to develop them into, even big league players, how you're working on the showcase circuit there, do you think it was a good idea for the White Sox to bring in a director of hitting like Ryan Fuller and then Brian Bannister, so they're going to take care of the whole development, or at least in charge of that top to bottom, and then you kind of switch now Ethan Katz and Marcus Thames to be more of being specific to helping pitchers and hitters at the big league level just focus on the game ahead of them?
Yeah, it's good because anywhere you go, I mean, I've even tried preaching it at the high school level. Like, we need someone to keep an eye on the young guys coming next. And the pitching coach can't do that. The pitching coach has to worry about who's in front of him. He can be aware of players, he can be knowledgeable about them, and he can help them in the offseason. But if you're not on that roster of those 162 games, it's really hard to be that focused on someone elsewhere. So that being said, you either have to trust your pitching coaches at the minor league levels, which, 4 different levels, potentially 4 different philosophies at times, even if you're all on the same page, 4 different ways of teaching it. Or you have one person who's kind of in charge of setting that all and overseeing it, but also being able to bounce around from place to place and have a good feel for everything that's going on, versus just having to solely trust the pitching coach at a given level. The same thing goes for the hitting side of things. The White Sox very clearly, A, have had a hitting philosophy that hasn't worked, but also B, have had inconsistent hitting philosophies over the years. And I think, again, you bring in another voice that has shown success in Baltimore, but also has a philosophy that's different than what the White Sox have done. It's not preaching contact, going the opposite way, turning guys who are sluggers into guys who are not and who are just all-around baseball hitters. Fuller has shown a little bit more of a willingness to say, this is who you are. Let's make you great at what you're good at and see if the rest comes along at the same time. Pitching's the same way. Pitching is throw your best stuff as often as possible, and we'll develop the rest along the way. I think that sort of maximization of skills versus trying to be okay at everything is a clear shift in strategy for the White Sox, and I think should benefit them in the long run.
All right, so everybody's heard my take on the offseason. I want to get Jordan's take after the break on how the White Sox did, and that's coming up next on Locked On White Sox. Welcome back into Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. Recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends, to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox, wherever they get their podcasts. The show's available on all major podcast platforms. Also, to appreciate a 5-star review. I think I'm at a 4.5 rating. Let's get that rating up. We'd really appreciate it. Here with Jordan Lazowski. I've been pronouncing your name right, correct? I always feel it. Okay. Jordan Lazowski of SoxOn35th.com. All right, so Jordan, how would you describe the White Sox offseason? Because I think it's been a prudent, practical offseason where they've spent absolutely no money.
Yeah, they haven't done much. My frustration with the offseason has been there wasn't anything that made me go, that's interesting. That's a different way of thinking about it. Other than like Talkman, for example. Like Talkman, it was very clear what they were doing. That is a good signing for where this team is at right now. I don't want to shortchange that. At the same time, on the pitching side, guys like Martin Perez and Bryce Wilson really don't move the needle for me. I think they take away innings from guys that I'd rather see get them, given that they've both been brought in to be starters, and I assume some sort of belief. Well, I don't know Wilson's contract structure, but Perez, it's not like you can just send him to the minors. There's no options left there. So you're guaranteeing him a spot on the roster, and you'd assume as a starter. I do like the ideas behind bringing in as many just bullpen arms as possible and seeing who sticks. I think relievers are volatile. I think the White Sox don't have a ton of guys who would qualify as major league relievers right now. Baroa and Jordan Leisure being two of them. Beyond that, I'm okay continuing to mix and match with relievers until the White Sox find the ones they want to stick with. I'd rather not say, oh, well, trying to think of a good name. Davis Martin, you lost out on a rotation spot, go to the bullpen. I'd rather not see that. I'd rather them stay starters and, again, see who sticks, make sure everyone's getting innings. And I think they did that. I think they've clearly made it a priority to, quote-unquote, let the kids play based on what they've done this offseason, and I'm fine with that. But with that comes the growing pains of letting the kids play. It's always fun to say, then you do it, and someone's in an 0 for 30 stretch, and you're like, well, the kids are playing, and that's where guys like Josh Rojas and Austin Slater come in, where if someone needs to get someone off the snide, like, they are capable major leaguers who can step in.
Yeah, the one thing that I thought they did I thought Chris Getz actually did a good job too, is just providing cover. I mean, Martin Perez, yeah, I'd prefer the younger guys getting arms, but it can't hurt to have a guy that at least still shows the guys, here's how you go about your business. And he's obviously better than Chris Flexen. But where I don't think he did a good job of providing cover, like veteran cover everywhere, is shortstop. So do you think Colson Montgomery breaks camp as a starting shortstop? And do you think that would be the right decision?
I don't, and I don't think it would be the right decision either. He did not hit well at AAA last year. Like, prove that you can handle that spot first, and then we'll go from there. Like, he's very young. There is no reason to rush him into this situation. That being said, I don't want to see Jacob Amaya take a lot of at-bats. I don't think he's part of the future. I don't think it's worth giving those at-bats to him. But to your point, that leaves Lenyn Sosa and Brooks Baldwin. And neither of them are prototypical shortstops. Baldwin has done a good job when asked to play there. I would give my opening day job to him, most likely. That being said, he's probably a long-term utility guy at best. So, are you putting him out there at shortstop every day and kind of dealing with the bat? What's the thing there? Josh Rojas would be a name, but he really hasn't played short in several years. So, the long and short of it will be Coastal Montgomery. Based on this team, we'll see plenty of at-bats this year, unless Brooks Baldwin just really lights the world on fire. That being said, I would like to see him working maybe with Fuller a little bit more and establishing a better presence at the AAA level before I'm prepared to say, yep, he's proven everything he needs to prove, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, like especially I like how you brought up Jacob Amaya, like taking away at bats, is he also just doesn't have any trade value. Like at least that catcher, I doubt you're going to trade Corey Lee, but like, let's say Matt Theis doesn't work out. You could probably trade him for cash, or you could trade him for a fringe prospect, because everybody needs a backup catcher. You could trade Josh Rojas if he gets back to at least being a decent player, because he's a good, player off the bench. You can at least get bullpen arms, and I'm with you. Let's never spend a lot of money on bullpen arms ever again. Mike Tauchman, Austin Slater, these are guys that you could probably get, ceiling bullpen arms guys. So, but with, Jacob Amaya and Lenine Sosa, there's just no value there too with the professional. That's why it feels like they've rigged it to where Colson Montgomery's going to win it. And on the only reason I could see, hey, give him the opening day job, is he's the only one on that roster of those guys that at least has very high upside. Because, Brooks Baldwin has said he's looking like he's going to be Ben Zobrist, which isn't a bad thing, but I don't think he's, got high upside there. Finally, you think the Sox should be targeting Cameron Appenzeller if he's available at number 10, the Illinois prep pitcher? I checked your guys' schedule. You avoid him, but do you think he's the target there?
Yeah, every time I keep saying prep pitchers are the demographic I avoid, they draft a Noah Schultz and then make me sound like a fool. So I have a hard time. My philosophy is I typically don't like prep arms. Having coached at the prep level, I have an understanding that, a very limited understanding, but still an understanding that a lot of coaches don't really care what they're doing to kids' arms at the prep level. And, it's sad to say, but it's almost like you're coming with the expectation somewhere down the line, these kids will have to have Tommy John surgery. It's almost an expectation, and I think that's fine. It's not fine, but you get the point. That being said, I like targeting either prep hitters or really ready to go college pitchers. Those are quote unquote safer. I think college bats sound safe, but in this college environment where you're using metal bats, and I just don't think that you get I don't think you get as much information from that demographic as a lot of people think. Long and short of it, if they really like a prep pitcher, I'm all for it, but it probably wouldn't be my first choice.
Actually, I got two more questions before I let you go. Then,
of course,
on the prep pitching, that the White Sox, I just have this feeling that they may have cracked the code though with Noah Schultz and his development plan, especially how they only had him, go once a week, 4 innings on a Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
Would that make you feel more comfortable doing, like, if the Sox continue to do that? Because the nice thing about a prep pitcher is you can actually do that because you have more time. Because right now Schultz is 20 years old, whereas if you did that with a college pitcher, let's say you did that, they're 21, 3 more years, maybe they're debuting at 24. It's not the end of the world, but would you be more comfortable if that's maybe kind of the norm that the White Sox do develop their pitchers?
It's a hard question, because part of it is, it's not that I don't trust what they've done, because I've been very vocal about the fact that I really like Ethan Katz. I really like Brian Bannister. I truly trust in what they're doing for the organization. That being said, they can't control the miles that have already been put on an arm. They can take care of them, help them grow a little bit, grow into their bodies, grow into major league ball players, but the risk never goes away. That being said, the risk is everywhere. If you find a guy that you really like, that the ceiling is high enough that the elevated risk is worth it, I'm all for it. I will never say avoid this guy because he's a prep pitcher. I will say, just be sure, because for every Noah Schultz, there's the guys like McAble, for example, or Jared Kelly. Jared Kelly's a great example. He fell to the Sox in the second round, and everyone was convinced he should be their pick in the first round when they took Crochet. I think we all feel pretty good about the decision they made to not take him first round. But at the time, you don't know how that's going to play out. It kind of brings us full circle, but the variance is highest on those arms. That's where it could be awesome, or it could be you never hear their name after a couple years. That's where the variance is highest for me. It gets smaller and smaller as you get older, as you get more experience, but it never fully goes away. So there's risk everywhere at the end of the day.
All right, finally, I understand why they use aluminum bats at high school, but why are they not using wood bats now in college? You would think, Louisville would start signing deals, and all these other bats would start signing deals, and got NIL and all that. I don't understand why they're not using wood bats at college. Sorry.
It surprises me to this day. I think probably part of it is the bat companies have a stranglehold at times, I'm sure. Again, I can't speak with any assurances on that, but I feel like if it were that simple, they probably would have done it by now, because I can't imagine major league teams being, and I'm sure they have some sort of view of it, and that's why things like the Cape League are so important, where they have to use wood bats. But you're going and seeing a 110 exit velo with a metal bat. What does that translate to at a wood bat? It's probably 4 or 5 mile an hour slower. There's plenty of research around it, so you can get around it, but the weight distributions, things like that. Like there's so much that goes into building a good metal bat that you can't account for with a wood bat. And I think all of those things combined probably have kept it where it is today. I don't know if it'll ever change. I do hope it does, though.
Yeah, and I remember a story. A legendary high school coach up in the Wisconsin area. He's the official scorekeeper of the Brewers. Was telling the story to us that he Dave Parker wanted him to bring an aluminum bat in once for batting practice, and he brought it in. Parker was launching balls like into the deep parking lot of County Stadium. That's how hard he was hitting it, and how hard he was launching it. And he was like, "Yeah, if this was in the major leagues, pitchers would be dead on the mound." So that
Right.
But I just have always, I've got the theory too. Is it a cost thing or that? And I know that you've
Sure
doing that. So I'm trying to get to the bottom of it, because it's really hard for me to watch college baseball. And I kind of want to watch more this year, because with the number 10 pick being so valuable, but it's like, it's so hard when I hear the ping. Like high school, I get it. And the little leagues and all that, because it's cheap to get a metal bat. But anyways,
I still highly encourage watching college baseball, though. It is quite fun to watch, especially once College World Series comes around.
Oh, I'm going to sneak my ESPN Plus subscription. I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to do that so my wife doesn't figure out that I'm spending like $15 a month on that. I'm going to figure that out. Well, anyways, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. For your second listen, find Locked On MLB. Baseball guru Sully brings a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every rumor and story throughout the offseason. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. I'll be back tomorrow to go over my attempt to project the White Sox opening day roster that I wanted to do on Wednesday, but couldn't with the Michael Taylor signing, and kind of was that a clue if Luis Robert Jr. was getting traded. Feel free to leave comments about today's discussion with Jordan Lazowski. And Jordan, again, where can we find all your great content?
Yeah, thanks again for having me on, Todd. I appreciate what you do, and like I say all the time for content creators, like it is not easy to do this with the White Sox right now, so I appreciate everyone who does it. Sox on 35th, at Sox on 35th is our Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. SoxOn35th.com is the website, and then my personal one, at JLazowski14. If you like some half-baked thoughts and some attempts at humor,
Hey, if you're a White Sox fan, you're still using X and Twitter, and I'm still there too, Jordan's the guy that you got to follow. He's a great follow. Anyways, you can leave any comment on the episode page at YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, at Todd J. Dub, or at Locked On Sox, or you can email me at lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com. Have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow.